AGM agenda meeting today. I will intend to hand over directly to the chair and who was appointed via full council meeting on the 20th of May, and that was Councillor Shah, and with Councillor Harriet Clough as the Vice Chair. Chair, I'll just hand over to you at this point. Thank you, Councillor Shah.
Thank you, Claudette, and a very warm welcome to everyone on this first municipal meeting of the Licensing Committee for 2020. Appreciate that this is still quite a new way of doing things, but I just want to convey my thanks to Democratic Services and to the tech team, and of course to licensing as well, for actually making this happen in a very seamless way. I understand that we've apology. Councillor Feehants, do we have any other?
That's just her at the moment. No.
Okay, so I take it that every of the previous meeting. So if I could just ask that that we take that as a fair and accurate representation. So I propose that that's a fair and accurate representation of the minutes of the previous meeting. Can I have somebody to second? Thank you. Well, I don't think there's any public forum today. Surprise, surprise. No.
No, I did check, Chair. I did check, and there didn't seem to be. There was a lot of public forum for the other.
And can I just confirm? So in terms of so move on to item agenda 6. We normally have 2 meetings per month. Can you just confirm that, Claudette?
I will, Chair. Normally, we do, but as you realise, because of COVID-19, things are changing. I think Emma Lake will may want to comment on that at this stage. Emma?
Yes, thank you. Basically, so you'll all have seen that a lot of the licensing committees have had less applications. As we move through the next stages, it's likely that we may have an influx of applications. So we're kind of waiting really on the government in terms of premises reopening, restaurants and things like that. So like I say, I think it's like that we may be able to have more applications shortly.
Having sat on the existing on the committees we've had so far, each individual application is taking a lot longer to process, though. So for 4 applications took us 10 hours on the first attempt. So they're going to need to be frequent but short.
That's right, and I think it's just we'll obviously liaise with Democratic Services once we start experiencing. If we do get an influx of applications, we'll, advise Dem Services as soon as possible so that we can try and, if we need additional hearings. The trouble is we don't know what the timescales are. Some places may not need to do full variations or grant applications anyhow, so we don't really know the number of applications we're going to be having. So it is going to be a kind of have to wait and see, unfortunately.
And it is something that I'm sure that as local councillors that we've been contacted by businesses that have been particularly badly affected. That is, of course, from governmental rules, but in terms of the importance of the licensing regulatory framework and announcements coming from pubs, clubs, bars, and the hospitality sector. So I think it'll be interesting to see going forward how that impacts the level of applications coming through. I just picked up a comment by Councillor O'Rourke just about a comment. So are you okay now, Councillor?
Yes, it's obviously just, I just couldn't hear, but I can hear everybody else now. Thank you.
Emma, so is there anything else that you'd like to add before I pass over to Jonathan for his comments as well?
Just in terms of the licensing policy and the SEV policy, some of you may be aware of kind of what's happened in terms of previously through the working groups, but currently the licensing policy, we're due to have a working group meeting next week. And in regards to the SEV policy, we're currently reviewing all the responses to the consultation, and there will be a working group meeting shortly. So they're both kind of at the same stages. However, the licensing policy, we're still looking to take that to full council on the 7th of July. So once we've been to the working group, then we'll share more information with you.
And what kind of timeframe do we have for taking CIA policy to full council?
So that would be the 7th of July as well, currently.
Both of them. It will be the CIA and SEV. Something else that sorry,
Chair, it's just the licensing policy, the main policy, and the CIA policies will be going on the 7th of July. The SEV policies, we don't have the timescales for as yet.
Yes. Yeah, thank you for that clarification. So in terms of the SEV policy, I have had a meeting with Helen Mott from the Foresight Society, and I've not had the privilege of having a presentation by Helen. That was just a brief meeting that I had with her at City Hall. Could I just ask other members whether they feel that it would be pertinent and also helpful in terms of the fact that she is a specialist with a lot of experience, whether that would be helpful to have a teleconference presentation with Helen Mott? Any thoughts there? It is something that I feel would be helpful. But obviously timescales are very limited. Okay. And,
could I ask what type of presentation we're talking about? I mean, some of us would have heard presentations from Helen Mott for many years now. I appreciate not all members have done that, but I think to just pick out one group, the Foresight Society, might well be difficult.
Especially as she has a
surely
very
they have
particular...
an opportunity. Sorry. Particularly because there's an opportunity to come and make a presentation to us when we are considering the SEV. And I think that's the appropriate time. If we start sort of listening to one outside the system, I just got a slight nerve about it.
Thank you, Peter.
We have several hands up. Sorry, we've got several hands up. Councillor Shah, can you see that?
Yes, yes. So who's had the hands up first?
So Councillor Comley has her hands up, Councillor Harriet Clough, and Councillor Brenda Massey, in that order.
Yes. Comley first, please.
Thank you. I think we have seen presentations from Helen Mott, and I think she has provided some really detailed analysis, and I think it would be everyone who's looking at the SEV policy to read that and digest that. And I wouldn't have any problem with questions being directed to Helen if there's any clarification you need from that evidence that she's provided. I think what I felt was really missing when the SEV policy came to this committee before, any kind of analysis of what has happened in other cities that have introduced a nil cap, because we said there's a risk of it pushing sexual entertainment underground and creating greater danger. We haven't seen any evidence that that is what happens. We now have several cities that have introduced a nil cap. It would be possible to get evidence from those cities, ask them how it has worked in practice for them. And I think that is the evidence that we really
I've slightly digressed from the actual agenda itself, but I just felt it was pertinent to actually raise that. Sorry, who had the hand up next? We've got
I did.
Councillor Clough.
Yes,
And
Councillor Clough.
My one concern is if Helen is given an opportunity to speak to us outside of the process. She has a very specific anti-sex work flavour of feminism that informs her opinion on things, and I would want to see balance in the conversation rather than being a single stream of material.
Thank you, Councillor Clough. Noted. Councillor Massey.
Thank you, Chair. We have had quite detailed discussions with a number of people about this subject, and I would not particularly favour having one individual returning for a second go. I think this is probably not something we should necessarily be discussing here, but more group. And I think we have to be open about taking opinions from all points of view rather than just one. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. On the 5th, so that is something that we
can I interject, Chair? Sorry, can I interject,
yes,
Chair? There is several people with their hands up at this time. Councillor Paul Goggin, Councillor Richard Eddy, and Councillor. But I do think Councillor Peter Abraham was first, Chair. So can we go to Councillor Peter Abraham?
Councillor Abraham. Councillor Abraham.
I just wanted to say I have great sympathy with what Eleanor said. I think there is, if you haven't seen the BAUS paperwork, I think it reasonable to have access to that and what they've said. And I'm sure Helen Mott would send members who. The other point is I was going to make, which has just been raised really, I think this should be referred to the working group. It is quite complex. When we looked at the point that was being raised regarding the nil cap, of course, many of the other authorities were in litigation because the courts were dealing with the situation. Now, I don't know what the current situation is in Manchester Leeds. I'm not up to speed now, although it would be quite easy. But I think that, again, the working group could look at what the current situation is in other authorities throughout the country, because we had moved forward and the courts had decided whether a nil cap was legal, I assume. So it's quite complex and we need to be sure what we're saying and what we're doing.
Thank you, Councillor Abraham. Councillor Eddy, just briefly.
Very briefly, I'd like to endorse Brenda's and Peter's view. I'm rather worry I the President we could accept by inviting Helen.
Okay. Did we have one more hand up?
Yes, Councillor Goggin, Paul Goggin, Councillor Paul.
You can just have Councillor Goggin as the last one on this particular issue. Councillor Goggin.
Chair, can you hear me?
Yes,
yes.
we can.
Yes, as a new member of the committee, I would be interested in hearing all sides, if you like. So as a start, I'd be willing to, with you, do a brief teleconference, and also with regards to the membership of the working groups. Again, as a new member, I don't believe that I'm on any of them. How do I go about doing that? Thank you.
So, Claudette, a bill was sent out asking members if they would like to be part of the working group.
So, Chair, can I just comment? So, to date, on the working groups are usually representatives from each party. So it may be that you may want to consider the balance of that, whether going forward everyone is happy for one member per party to represent on each group. We have that on the licensing policy working group. and you need to decide whether on the SEV working group you will widen that or just continue with one representative from each group. So it's something that I don't know if you would like to just email me after the meeting with your comments.
And just before we pass over to John, just in terms of the working groups and in terms of attendance, do we have some kind of breakdown? Because there's a lot of very important work taking place, and especially given the tight time constraints. Can you just give any indication in terms of attendance of licensing committee members and working group members?
Usually the groups are well attended because the licensing policy working group has done some intense work up until when they did the wider sharing with the members of the council. What we have with the SEV, that hasn't met for some time, since 2018, and therefore in respect of that there may be some consideration needed between members, parties and their whips as to who will represent on each group. I have had some feedback on that. I'm just waiting for the Lib Dems to confirm who will sit. So that's the position so far. I will, as I do, send out the requests for meeting dates, and I'll just wait for party members to come back to me to confirm their attendance, Chair.
Thank you, Claudette. Can we just pass over to John? I know you've been eagerly waiting, John. So any updates from yourself?
So, Chair, sorry, I've been experiencing some difficulties with people dropping out. So is there any specific questions you want me to answer, or is it just a general sort of update you're requesting on the back of what Emma advised you on?
Yes, just a general update.
Okay, so obviously, as Emma advised the committee, we've experienced, unsurprisingly, a significant drop-off in the number of applications being received. However, with the government announcements which are being drip-fed over the last week or so about potential relaxations, the conversations that we've been having with licensing specialists around the Bristol area, and you'll be familiar with those who have been in committees dealing with those lawyers, is that we're expecting a fairly significant number of variations, whether they're full variations or minors, to be submitted over the next few weeks. The challenge that we've got, and I want to make sure that members appreciate this, that as licensing, we're in no greater position of knowledge than the general public in terms of what the announcements are which are being made by the government. So we have no prior knowledge. So that places great difficulty on us to react to those in a very quick time. And obviously we're expecting announcements potentially this weekend and certainly over the next week or two with the relaxations which are coming. So we are expecting some great strain. The kind of measures that we're putting in place really is trying to make this as business friendly as possible. So what we're going to be offering is pre-advice sessions to specialist licensing lawyers prior to application to try and help steer them as to what the appropriate application ought to be prior to receipt. And in addition to that, and this is where it gets very, very difficult for us because there's a lot of guidance notes which are in circulation, is trying to assimilate all that information into something where we can arrive at a specialist pool of conditions. You're all familiar with your own policy, where we've got pools of conditions there, but potentially coming forward with a pool of conditions which are bespoke to the reaction around COVID-19 and to help try and steer business and licensed premises as to what appropriate measures may be put in place for their particular premise. Of course, each premise is very different, and that places particular difficulty on providing general advice because until we know what the individual license is, what the individual premise is, it's very difficult to give general advice in this area. Layered on top of this, what we do not know is whether there's going to be any general direction and any emergency legislation which will, in effect, take precedence over the Licensing Act and the procedures that we've got to operate under. And we've seen that exercised already with planning in the initial stages of the emergency measures that were introduced. So, for example, building sites at the moment, they can extend their working hours beyond the planning requirements, and that's emergency measures that were put in place. So at the moment, we're assimilating all the information that we have got to put us in the best position to react. And that's working with colleagues around the council, particularly highways, where social distancing on the highway and pavements is going to impact on licensed premises who may be able to open on an outdoor only basis. So a very fluid situation here. I think that's a summary of where we're at.
If I just ask, we've had an announcement of sorts from the Prime Minister, or an indication, sorry, I should say not an announcement, that the 2 metre social distancing rule could actually go. So do we have the resources in place to ensure that pubs, clubs, restaurants, those licensed premises will be strictly adhering to this once the restrictions are actually lifted and those establishments are actually able to open?
Yes, I'm aware of what the Prime Minister was suggesting yesterday in relation to the hospitality sector, reducing the social distancing measures from 2 to 1 metre. It's impossible for me to answer that question, Councillor, because until the announcements are made as to what the relaxation measures are going to be, and this all feeds into that bigger equation of how businesses are going to be reopening. They simply do not know at the moment what the requirements are going to be. And we're seeing a number of different messages coming from central government on this, whether it's cafes being able to open outdoor only, and then there's going to be some delay to licensed premises. I simply do not have the answer at the moment for you.
And just briefly, there's also been a lot of confusion around shisha bars. I know that in Eastern Ward, Lawrence Hill Ward, and other parts of the city as well, Ashley Ward, there have been many people congregating in shisha bars. There's a lot of confusion around that. Do we have some kind of understanding if there's any policy going forward on that, anything more than simple guidance?
Well, specifically in relation to shisha, it's an unlicensed activity. So there's no licensing requirement under the Licensing Act, or indeed any license requirement for shisha bars. There is, of course, legislation under smoke-free legislation and it's no different from cigarette smoking, that it's prohibited to smoke indoors now. So there is a working group that was producing guidance and visiting shisha bars immediately prior to the current emergency measures that we've got in place. And that work is ongoing. But at the moment, of course, it's a question of priorities, and where our enforcement resources are being placed is general compliance with the closure provisions, which are currently in place.
So I was unaware of the working group. Do fellow members feel that this is something that they'd like to actually take this forward? Because I certainly wasn't aware of a working group. I mean, I appreciate that everyone's been really busy. Can you?
So I don't, Councillor, sorry to cut across you. I don't think it fits within the terms of reference for this committee. I may be wrong, and it would be something for us to look at. But I can advise that certainly members were involved in that.
Okay.
Particularly Asher Craig was involved as well.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Do any other members have any questions for Emma or John? No? That's fine. So we've got licensing committee meetings on the 11th, on the 18th of June, and the 8th of July. Is that correct?
9th of July, Chair. Sorry, Chair. Just
11th.
9th of July.
On the 9th of July. Okay, that's fine. Sorry. Do members have any other comments?
Chair, could I interject?
Sure.
Could we move on to constituting the Special Purposes Subcommittee, if at all possible? It comprises of usually the Chair and the Vice Chair, and I think the third member from last year, was that Councillor Richard Eddy?
It was.
It was.
To continue with that, Councillor Eddy?
Yes, indeed, Chairman.
Is everybody else happy with that?
And I'm happy to continue on that.
Okay.
Is that resolved? There's no objections to that, members?
No.
Everyone can shake their heads or move their heads.
Any objections now? Okay. Okay, that's fine. Just moving on to
delegations, maybe. Can we just resolve that, please, Chair?
Yes. Can you just provide an update on that, Claudette?
It is as set out in the report. Emma, I don't think the balloon fiesta will be happening, much to everybody's disappointment this year, probably. But the delegations and the asks are set out in the reports, and if we could just have members just agree, it doesn't have to be a formal vote, it is as standard that we can proceed as outlined as officers have recommended. So if we could resolve.
Aye.
Thank you.
If I can propose, do we have a seconder? Was that Councillor Clough?
It was.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have that noted. There's no objections to that.
Okay, just move on to item agenda 7. I think that we've
covered.
Yeah, that's pretty much covered. Is Nick about? Nick Carter, Head of Regulatory Services? Has Nick joined us today?
No, Chair, sorry, Nick hasn't joined. That's why Emma and Jonathan Martin gave their reports earlier to you. So that.
Well, that actually concludes that section of the meeting. Any other business? Would anybody like to raise anything, or are we happy to wave the meeting off and look forward to our next meeting? I see all smiles. I think everybody is quite content. Okay. Well, can I just thank everybody for joining the meeting today, and have a very lovely day. We will be in contact, or certainly Claudia will be in contact by email. I've had a few councillors just message me on a few issues, so I will be in contact about that. And with the Lib Dems and the constitution of the working groups, we will be in touch with Zara to just to chase that up. So thank you very much to everybody, and see you at the next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, members.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Cass, Dan, if we can conclude today. Thank you very much, members.
Thank you. Thanks, bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.